Hey everybody, glad that you are joining us for another episode of Learn Biz with Ryan Murray, Ethan Miliori, your hosts. So I got this idea talking to a colleague of mine, and I started expounding on this idea, and I think there's a lot here for small businesses, and it's the idea of thought employees. So there are different types of employees that you're going to have in your business, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Is we're going to talk about the different types of employees and how to manage those employees correctly or effectively. Correct is kind of a strong word because I don't think there's one right way to do it, but effectively is what we're looking at. But these thought employees are employees that are not paid to make anything or sell anything. And so I'm going to put it into two categories. I'm going to say you've got producers, and I put sales in with producers because they produce sales. You could argue it into three categories and say that you have, people that they get paid for their thoughts and their ideas, their leadership. You get people who get paid to make something or produce something, and then you get people who get paid to sell something. The reason why I put producers and sales in the same category is I look at like a restaurant example. If I have if I have a waiter, the waiter essentially is a salesperson because their whole job is to sell the food to the people sitting in the restaurant. But I look at that and I'm like, I know they're not cooking the food. They're not really making that, but they're adding to the experience. They're kind of that team with the cooks. And sometimes you'll see a lot of restaurants that'll split the tips just because they understand that it's a little bit more of a collaborative effort. So what I'm saying, and the reason I break it down this way is because thought leaders, thought employees, it's hard to pinpoint whether they're doing a good job for the company or a bad job for the company. And producers, it's easy. So if I have a waiter who's turning tables, I can calculate how effectively those tables are turning. If I have, a real estate agent that's selling houses, I can see how many houses are being sold. If I work on a factory line, I can see how many parts are processed in a given period of time. And so all of those are the tangibles, and then you have the intangibles of thought. And more and more, people get paid for their thoughts. They get paid for their ideas. They get paid for their decisions. How, as a business, do you effectively gauge if people are making good decisions? How do you gauge how much time they should be working? How do you gauge how much you should be paying them for those decisions? And I'm going to put one more thing, and I apologize. I know I'm just not even giving you 10 seconds to get a thought in yet, but let me put out one more thing, and then we'll hear your take and go from there. But this thing that I want to put out is this idea that a lot of thought employees are paid based on industry standards. Well, industry standards are kind of grandfathered up to the point that they're not necessarily paid based on the contribution. They're kind of paid based on the expectation. So you'll have some fields where this particular employee expects to earn X amount of money. An attorney expects to be within a certain range versus a night manager. Right. And I don't know that I could say that the attorney has to think more than the night manager has to think. There's clearly more schooling and education that goes into the attorney.
Well, and that would be the one.
You decided you finally wanted to say something.
Well, no, because you're going down the path that I would have probably broached, and that is, I think we need to have a discussion about who potentially is a thought employee inside of the various organizations, so you understand that, because otherwise, you could be thinking, well, the CEO is the thought person, but sometimes it is just a marketing director, right? It's the marketing director who's figuring out how to expand our market, They're trying to figure out what marketing campaigns are going to be more profitable.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, it could be, something that's really, you get it. And when you say an attorney, that's very formal. You kind of understand that's the game that they play. But on the other hand, it could be inside of a manufacturing. It could be one of our engineers.
It could be, yeah.
So that's the piece I'd want to, is you're thinking about a thought person. It's understanding that role, and especially in smaller organizations, is a little bit gray. And it may not be all their time that they're doing that one, but there's a significant component of it where they're getting paid for their knowledge, the way that they are able to create and expand products or marketing campaigns. I mean, because it's broad, but because funny enough, I don't put all, the smaller the business gets, I don't put all even owners into that thought employee.
Well, and that's a good point, that you
kind of brash, but
you can end up doing both. And so I want to go back to the clear definition that I'm using. And there can be other definitions. This isn't the definition. This is the definition that I'm using. A thought employee, you cannot pinpoint their actions and their hours to the financials.
Correct.
Versus a producer, you can. And that's how I'm going to just distinguish.
And that helps for the listeners to say, okay, yeah, great. Now when I'm thinking about how they are and we structure it, and especially going with the conversation going forward, now that's, at least for this conversation, that's the definition that we're working by.
Yeah.
And I totally agree with that definition.
And so let's run, you brought up, I want to use the attorney example, and I want to use the marketing example, because I think those are really good examples. I mean, we could do the same thing with an engineer, but I think that attorneys and marketing are a little bit more in every single company. Yes. Engineers, it really depends.
Depends on the industry.
Yeah. So let's start with this idea of a marketing director or VP of marketing or whatever title, right? So you've got someone who's going to, and in fact, it could even be lower down. Let's pull it out of management here for a second. Let's say that you just got a marketing team and you've got someone that they oversee social media marketing for the company.
Okay.
It is impossible to say that if I post X amount of times on social media that I will get X amount of sales dollars from that. And that's what defines them as a thought employee. Versus a producer, if I have a, going back to the restaurant, if I have a table, I know that that table is going to be worth a certain amount of money. The more tables I can turn, the more money that I can make. If I go into retail, whether that's online e-commerce or whether that's traditional storefront, the number of shirts that I sell, the more shirts that I sell, I can count that and put that onto my financials. But the number of posts that I post, sometimes they do great, sometimes they do poorly. There are lots of things that are factoring into that. And so it becomes difficult, if not impossible, to fully gauge, okay, is this social media marketer worth the salary that we're paying her? And so I want to go now to the attorney example, and I'll use this as kind of a for instance. So for instance, if I have an attorney, most small businesses that I work with do not have attorneys or legal counsel in-house.
Correct.
They contract out their legal counsel, and that legal counsel is going to have an hourly wage that's very well known.
Yes.
And when they need to use legal counsel, I always see this. Management team will get together and they'll decide, do we want to hire legal counsel or should we just take care of this? Because they don't want to pay the $350 an hour or whatever the rate is. And so they'll kind of assess and put a little bit of a value to it. But the interesting thing is I don't see business owners, small business owners do the same thing when they start making marketing decisions. They don't say, okay, we just had a meeting and we talked about marketing for the last hour. So what did that meeting cost us? Well, you had the CEO sitting in that meeting. You had the director of marketing sitting in that meeting. You had the social media expert sitting in that meeting. And, by the time you add all those up, it's the same $350 an hour that you would have paid legal counsel. But to you as a business owner, you're thinking, oh, that's a big deal. I got to think through this. But marketing, it's in-house. And so, well, we just use marketing. And we don't really assess, is it good or bad, until it all starts to go awry. You finally had it. You're like, I haven't seen anything good come out of you for the last 3 years. You're fired. No one says, okay, what did the last 2 weeks look like? And you see the entrepreneur, the owner, try and pin that. Well, what are you guys working on right now? Well, we're doing this social campaign. Is it working? Well, it takes time. These things take time.
Which they do.
They do. It's the correct answer, but it's also the incorrect answer. And so the owner is sitting there like, do I trust that they're doing their job? Do I not trust that they're doing their job? Yeah. And I've got more on this, but I'm going to pause for a second and get some of your thoughts before I'm going to shift gears here pretty harsh in a second.
Well, I keep going back to when you're defining employees, when you talk about it, because I talk in terms of whether it's organic or mechanical, right? Mm-hmm. Organic meaning what we put in doesn't guarantee what we get out. And oftentimes we don't get the same input out. On mechanical, when we put in aluminum, we get the pop can out, right? Yeah. Organic, when I put the aluminum in, I might get a flower, I might get a pop can, and I might get a toy.
Yeah.
Right? Because it becomes unpredictable and so many other factors that are going on. And so, as you think about those employees, et cetera, I like your definition, but for me, I always internalize it from the standpoint, is it organic related, meaning I just don't know what the outcome is going to be. And a lot of things in business we do are more organic than they are mechanical.
Yeah.
So as you start thinking about how do I deal with employees, right? The mechanical piece is, hey, I need someone at the front desk from 8 to 5, right? The other day
and by the way, I would call these producers. If you have to be there from 8 to 5,
that's right.
You're not a thought employee.
Yeah. So producer is mechanical by nature,
yes.
right?
Yes.
Okay. Right. So, the other day picking up some hardware stuff, stop into the, hardware store, and I'm there as soon as they open because I have a lot that I got to get done that day. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that the thought producer's already there, right? Okay, they're there. This is what we're going to do. And it's interesting. All right, I go to finish my order and they're like, yeah, I have a slight problem. My producers aren't here yet, right? And so I found that interesting. So, as you look at it, that helps me understand that, the value of the individual because of they move into those thought producers because all of a sudden there's an investment that they have in it, right?
Yeah.
Not just a job.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. And so, anyways, as you're thinking about that and then I'm running my mind through other companies and organizations I worked with or experiences I have, I'm like, in the beginning, as we have the conversation, what's a producer and versus, a thought employee, you kind of go, well, I'm not sure. But when you start really thinking about it and just thinking about your organization, it becomes pretty clear, honestly.
It does. Mm-hmm. So that's actually a pretty decent lead in. It doesn't make my shift as dramatic, but I do want to start talking about how can you, the listeners, start to manage this. Because it's interesting to put out some dilemmas and say, oh, what do you do? What do you do? What do you do? Let's start putting some solutions out there. So the first solution that I have is anytime you're dealing with thought employees, look at the cost of mistakes. And this is where I never want to start with understanding what a thought employee's potential up value is worth, the upside value is worth. I want to look at what the potential downside risk is, and does this thought employee avoid those risks? So going back to at the very beginning, I said you've got an attorney and you've got a night manager. The attorney is probably going to make 4 times the salary as a night manager.
Yeah.
And obviously there's a lot of variation there, but let's just kind of run with the fact that attorney is going to expect to make significantly more than a night manager.
Right.
Well, if your attorney makes a mistake for your company, what does that cost your company? It could cost you the entire company.
Yes. 90% of the time it's going to be more expensive than the night manager.
Yes.
It just is.
And so if your night manager makes a mistake, what's that going to cost you? Some embarrassment, a key employee quitting on you. Maybe you're, you let down some promises to customers. You've got some cleanup that you have to do. No one likes mistakes. It's not like one mistake is good and the other one's bad. They're all uncomfortable and awkward. But looking at the gravity of those mistakes is the first thing that I'm going to do when I determine the value of a thought employee. And when I say value, I'm talking how much am I going to pay them?
Yeah.
What kind of salary am I going to give this thought employee? Instead of just looking traditionally and saying, okay, well, accountants make this much, so there you go. I would look at it and say, well, what happens if my accountant screws up? Is it one of those things where I get slapped with a little bit of a fine from the IRS because we did it incorrectly? Or does it completely run my business under because they happen to have access to all of my accounts and really could embezzle some serious money? So I'm looking at the potential risk. And that's where I would start with thought employees. And so the second part to this, so part one is start with the risk instead of starting with the potential.
Okay.
And then part two that I would say is when I am looking at the risk, if I've had a thought employee for any period of time, they've worked with me for a year, 5 years, 10 years, whatever. What's their track record of avoiding risks? If they are successful at avoiding risks, in my estimation, 9 times out of 10, they're a great thought employee for you. If they're not causing problems, then they're a great, not a good, a great employee for you. Because again, we're trying to avoid those problems. And I think that entrepreneurs think the wrong way. They're always looking at what's the growth that you can give to my company?
Yeah.
What's the benefit that you can produce for my company? And I'm looking at it and I'm saying, no. How do you keep me from getting sued? How do you keep me from losing customers? How do you keep me from having to shut down?
See, I've always looked at it slightly different angle when it comes to the people that we put in that thought category. And that is, are they constantly bringing solutions for improvements and efficiencies to the table?
Okay.
Right? So not necessarily, are they mitigating risk? Yes. And I want them to do that. But at the same time, most companies have to be driven by either efficiencies or innovation to stay competitive. So I need people who are working on those constantly as well, which means as problems arise, great, that's fine if you want to give me the problem, but it's sure nice when you have employees who are actually working on those as well, right?
So I'm agreeing with you here. I'm just putting a little bit of a prioritization to it. See, I'm putting risk mitigation priority 1.
Correct.
Efficiencies and innovation would be priority 2, would be the things that I'm looking for.
And I can't argue against that because the logic, I totally get and understand.
And then I would sneak in a priority number 3, and that priority number 3 would be metrics and measurements. So I'm looking and I'm saying, are you capable of somehow showing me how effective your thought process is. Your decision-making process. Are you able to show me, is this a good decision-making process, an average decision-making process, or a poor decision-making process? Yeah. And so that's kind of how I'm putting it, as I'm saying, all right, every single one of my thought employees, the first thing, are you mitigating risk? Are you getting risk out of my company? And this is relative, by the way, because you might be in a risky industry or business. Talking about the marketing that we've been hitting on a lot. So any marketer that isn't taking risk is doing nothing. If you're always at the back end where it's safe and secure, you're never leading the charge, then you're kind of a crappy marketer, in my opinion. And so there's a lot of risk inherently built into marketing, but I look at my accountant, who also is a thought employee, and I say, you need to be hitting about a 99% accuracy. I'll give 1% because things happen, but so I do have some different standards of what I'm willing to accept and tolerate. But then on the efficiencies and innovation, I don't want my accountant being innovative. I mean, efficient, yes. But I do not want my thought employee accountant to be innovative and be like, okay, I know everyone else is using a balance sheet, but check out what I have.
I have a great idea for new financials. It's kind of funny. Unless they're innovative somewhere else. But you're right. I'm going to be stuck on that thought for a while.
And then finally getting into the metrics or the accountability, again, it's not all the same. I see these CEOs, these business owners, that they want to know what people are doing, and so they're like, well, why can't you give me a report like, like this employee, I clocked how many sales they had for their shift.
Well,
you can't do that.
Let me share a really, really simple example. So I had a conversation with the dad of one of our junior entrepreneurs that we do.
We did an episode on your junior entrepreneur program.
Just recently I ran into one of the dads, and so it's been a few months now since we did the Shark Tank, and so they've had the summer to grow their businesses and everything. And the dad was, just talking about how great the son was doing and the business was growing and excitement and whatever else. And he says, the funny thing is, though, the one thing that's paying the most dividends is, he does a great job with his lawn care business, but he says, I've found that the extra 5 minutes he sits with one of his target markets is widows.
Okay.
So, so when he sits on the porch and has a lemonade with the widow for 5 extra minutes, he says, that's what pays the most dividends, right? But you can't put a price to that.
You can't.
Right? But that relationship building piece of what he does is the reason why they love him so much, because he gives them the time of day to have a cup of lemonade with him on the porch, right?
Well, and I love this example because lawn care, super simple business.
Yeah.
Like, this is something, it's a junior entrepreneur. So the kid doing it, what is he, 12, 13?
15.
15. Okay. So he's getting on a little bit of the older end.
Makes a killing, can't even drive a car yet. So I can't even imagine what he'll make when he actually can get himself around.
Yeah. So, but as a producer, I'm looking at how quickly can you mow that lawn.
Right. That's right.
And so that's a produce employee.
That's correct.
And you're just trying to say, okay, if I'm making $20 off of that lawn being mowed, and it takes me 10 minutes in travel time and 20 minutes to get the lawns done, then the company is bringing in $40 an hour, and that's the rate. If I can shorten that time, then I increase the company's hourly
efficiencies.
Yes, but to sit down for 5 minutes, that's now the marketing.
Yeah.
It's customer service, customer retention is what's happening there, because now he's going to get referrals off of it. He's going to get repeat business. When the competition comes in and undercuts him, he can actually raise his price a little bit and say, well, lawns are now $25 instead of $20. And they'll still pay it because they're not paying for the lawn service. They're paying for the full package. Yeah. And so I love the fact that that's a simple example, because sometimes when we get into complex businesses, you're running a small business and you are ordering wholesale in, and then you have to resell that, and you're running your e-commerce. You've got your website that you're trying to do some SEO on. You've got your social media strategies. You're trying to turn your inventory at a quick enough rate so that you're staying competitive. And all of a sudden you're like, well, that's a cute story for the kid mowing lawns. I'm like, it's the same thing. It's the exact same thing, that if you as an e-commerce are not taking the 5 minutes to respond to negative online reviews.
Yeah, exactly.
Like that's all that's happening here. You can spend 5 minutes sitting down with the widow sipping lemonade, or you can spend 5 minutes replying to negative online reviews. It's the same business strategy.
Yeah. So there, on that thought one, interesting enough, both you and I know that you have to treat them, pay them, schedule them differently. Mm-hmm. It just is the nature of the beast. It's helping the different categories of those employees understanding the lanes that they need to be in and why they're in those lanes, because too often people start feeling like all these lanes are merging when they're really not.
Yeah.
Right? And for some organizations, I saw a picture a while ago of one of the highways in China. It was like 25 lanes wide, right? Just unreal.
Wow.
I've never even seen anything close to that in the United States. I've seen some pushing 10, right? But it was just unreal. And that's unfortunately how we feel so often about employees, that we have all these employees, but we forget that no, each one of these lanes is there for a very specific reason. And yes, at some point in time, some of those may merge because it makes sense. But if you try merging all of those, the problem is now you're starting to lump all employees into one category instead of saying, no. I am paying them for very specific actions and talents and skill sets that allow my company to grow in ways that other components cannot.
So it's interesting. I was trying to teach my son this concept of thought work, because he's a junior in high school and he's starting to look at colleges, and I'm asking him the question, what do you want to be when you grow up, and what are you going to go into? And so I was trying to help him understand what thought employment is, and help him to see the best career path for him. And I just made this comment. I said, thought employment tends to pay a lot more than any producers. Right. Now, there's obviously exceptions on both sides, but for the most part, your thought employees are the ones that are actually making the higher salaries. And he didn't really understand what thought employment meant. And so the example that I gave him is I said, all right, in your math class, what do you get graded on? Just whether I got it right or wrong. And I'm like, exactly. Does your teacher care how long it took you to finish that assignment? And like, no. And I'm like, so if you and your friend both submit the assignment, get the same number of problems right and wrong, and one of you took 15 minutes to finish the assignment and the other took an hour to finish the assignment, I'm like, who is actually getting, and this is where the air quotes would come out, paid more to do it? And he's like, well, if I get it done in 15 minutes and I get the same score as someone who took an hour, right, that's clearly the better deal. And I'm like, that's what thought employment is if the quality of the decision is still the same, whether it's done in 15 minutes or an hour, or it takes 2 weeks to get to that decision, if the quality of the decision is still the same, then it doesn't matter. Now, this is where, to me, it jumps back to the risk aversion, because I want the quality of any decision of a thought employee to first be, don't make the wrong decision. That's the first thing. The second thing is, now let's try and make the right decision. So, if we come out the other end and all we did was not make the wrong decision, that means I at least get a second chance to try and make the right decision. But if I make the wrong decision, I might be done. And so, thought employees, I'm saying most of your time should be spent not making bad decisions. And then once you're confident that you're not making a bad decision, now you can move on to making a good decision. I have one more thought. I've been kind of ranty on this one, and honestly, this thought is big enough that we're probably going to end up doing a follow-up episode. The thought is this: if we're paying people for the quality of their decisions, we need to stop thinking in terms of hours.
Correct.
And so many people, they recognize that they have thought employees, but then they still want those employees to just be sitting around, because it's like, well, you can't go home early because I haven't let my producer go home early.
That's right.
And so you have to stay here. And I'm like, so does that improve the quality of the decision? No. If it takes you 15 minutes to get the math assignment done or an hour to get the math assignment done, what do you actually want? You want the 15-minute version.
Well, and the reason being is, going back to, I believe it's the Parkinson principle, that the task seems to fill the amount of time that's allotted.
Yeah.
Right? So if I have a thought producer who's doing things faster, more efficiently, okay, now they're not working by hours. They're working on, I'm getting things done, right? So they're getting more done versus, well, you know what, if I have all day to get these 3 tasks done, then great. I can do this for a little bit, and then I'll pound that out, and then I don't know, maybe I'll go see if John wants to go to lunch, and then I'll pound out the next one, and then I don't know. Let's go see if there's any problems out on the line, and if there's not, then I'll finish this one off just before I go home, right?
Yeah.
Versus, no, that the whole theory behind it is that thought producer is aware of time. They understand the value of time. They understand the efficiencies of the mental game. And so they're getting all that stuff done in the morning, so that now they can say, okay, now that I have that done, now I can work on those projects that I never have time for, right? I can work on these efficiencies. I can work on this innovation. I can work on this professional development. I can go do some training with this staff member, right? So it's just, it forces a different change in your mindset to where you stop worrying about hours, and as much as when the day's done, I want to be able to look back and say, I've accomplished all these things that added value to me as an individual, but a value to my employer as well.
Yeah. And so I'm looking at this and I'm saying, okay, we're looking for efficiencies throughout our business. Why in the world would we not look for efficiencies with thought employees?
Yeah.
But then that opens up the can of worms of how do you manage, and you better manage your thought employees differently than your hourly producing employees, whether they're hourly or salaried.
Yeah.
But if they're a producer, then they're paid for the amount of time that they're there. And in theory, if you add more time, they produce more. But if you add more time to a thought employee, they don't produce more. They just fill a devil's idle hands are a devil's workshop. And so they start to get bored, especially real good thought employees. Their mind's constantly going. And if you tell them that they need to take 4 hours on a task that should only take 1 hour, they will start to cause problems with that other 3 hours. And it's funny. So I love dogs, right? We've got a Doberman, and she's a beautiful dog, wonderful dog. And reading up on Dobermans, they're very intelligent dogs, but they start to get anxious. And when they get anxious, they cause problems. And so you have to make sure that you are giving them, things to think about and plenty of exercise so that they don't get anxious and cause problems. And that's the stupid thing is employees are the same as, this
Right.
dog that if I make you anxious or bored, you're not going to do productive stuff if the whole company structure is centered around boredom. You're going to do stuff that wastes time or distracts other people or causes problems. Right. So all of a sudden you got drama because you're trying to be fair and make sure that thought employees are treated like producing employees, which is a huge mistake. To the point that I think I want to do a follow-up episode on this. I want to do a follow-up episode. So we're going to do this. I'm making the decision right now. We're doing a follow-up episode. We're going to talk about thought employees, producing employees, contract employees, and commission employees. Okay. Because they all four of those categories need to be managed differently. And if you're managing them the same, all you're doing is introducing problems into your business.
Yeah. Okay. And actually that would be a great follow-up because now I think we can pin down specifics and practices for each one. So it's for some guidance on how to maybe deal with them, because if you don't have some of those in place right now, it's going to be a little bit tough to implement some stuff, but in the long run, it's going to save your organization money and you'll see more growth.
Yeah. So, okay, let's go ahead and pause there.
All right, perfect.
Hopefully you enjoyed this episode. It definitely is a little bit more of the, high level thinking, getting into, I would call this more advanced management. And so hopefully you guys were able to follow some of the thoughts that went into this more advanced management topic that we were talking about. If you do have any questions, if you want to challenge some of the assumptions that we've made, that's always fun too. You can reach me, Ryan at learnbiz.co or Ethan at learnbiz.co. You can see all of our great content on jazzjune.com, and we will catch you next time.